James, I need you to file the paperwork immediately. Yes, the dissolution papers for the partnership agreement with my son's company. My hands weren't shaking as I held that phone in my hotel room at the Scottsdale Marriott, even though my whole world had just shifted on its axis. I want every penny of my investment back, plus the current market valuation. He has 30 days. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. My attorney, James O'Connor, had handled my late husband's business affairs for over 20 years, but he'd never heard this tone in my voice before. Cold, calculated, final. Helen, are you absolutely certain about this? This is your son we're talking about. I looked out at the Arizona desert stretching endlessly beyond my hotel window. The same landscape I'd been admiring just hours earlier when I thought I was here for a loving family visit. James, I've never been more certain of anything in my 66 years on this earth. But let me back up and tell you how a simple mother-son visit turned into the biggest business decision of my life. Because what happened in that pristine house in Scottsdale wasn't just about a canceled flight or hurt feelings. It was about respect, boundaries, and the moment I realized that sometimes the people who take the most from you are the ones who claim to love you the most. My name is Helen Westbrook, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and unconditional love. If you're watching this from your own living room, wondering if you've given too much of yourself to ungrateful children, then, honey, this story is for you. And if that little hype button appears while you're watching, please click it, because this message needs to reach every mother and grandmother who's ever been taken for granted. What I'm about to share happened just 3 months ago, but it feels like a lifetime. 3 months since I learned that being a loving mother and being a smart businesswoman don't have to be mutually exclusive. 3 months since I discovered that sometimes the best way to love someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. You see, I raised my son Daniel to be independent, to be strong, to make his own way in the world. What I didn't expect was that he'd use those very qualities against the woman who gave him everything, including $680,000 to start his dream company. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me start from the beginning, back when Daniel was still the sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and tell me I was the prettiest mama in the whole wide world. I grew up in a little town called Bisbee, Arizona, where the copper mines provided work for most folks, and family meant everything. My daddy worked those mines for 37 years, came home every night with red dust in his hair and stories about the men who worked alongside him. Mama raised 4 kids on a miner's salary, which meant hand-me-down clothes, casseroles that stretched ground beef into 3 meals, and Christmas presents that came from creativity rather than money. But what we lacked in material things, we made up for in love and respect. In our house, you didn't talk back to your elders. You helped your neighbors without being asked. And you understood that family came first, always. When Daddy got hurt in a cave-in back in 1978, every single family in our neighborhood showed up with covered dishes and offers to help. That's the Arizona I knew, the one where people looked out for each other. I met my husband, Robert, when I was 22, working as a secretary at the mining company's main office. He was an engineer, 10 years older than me, with kind eyes and calloused hands that told the story of a man who wasn't afraid of honest work. We courted for 8 months before he proposed, right there on the front porch of my parents' house, with my daddy's permission and a ring that cost him 3 months' salary. We settled in Phoenix, where Robert found work with a construction company that was building shopping centers and office buildings for the growing city. Arizona was booming in the 80s, with people moving in from California and back east, looking for affordable land and year-round sunshine. Robert worked his way up from site engineer to project manager, and eventually he started his own small construction firm, specializing in residential developments. Those were good years, busy years. I worked part-time doing bookkeeping for local businesses, while Robert built our company from the ground up. We lived modestly, saving every extra penny and reinvesting it back into the business. Our first house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch in Tempe, with a small yard where I planted roses, and Robert built a workshop where he'd tinker with projects on weekends. Daniel came along when I was 28. After 3 miscarriages that had left us heartbroken and wondering if we'd ever be parents, his arrival felt like a miracle. Robert used to joke that Daniel was destined for greatness because he was already causing drama before he was even born. I was in labor for 18 hours, and the poor kid came out with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck twice. From the moment I held him, I knew Daniel was special, not just because every mother thinks her baby is extraordinary, but because there was something different about the way he looked at the world. Even as a tiny infant, his eyes seemed to take in everything, processing and cataloging information like a little computer. When other toddlers were content to bang on pots and pans, Daniel was taking apart Robert's flashlights to see how they worked. Robert and I made a decision early on that we would give Daniel every opportunity we'd never had. We enrolled him in private school, paid for piano lessons and soccer camps, and when he showed an aptitude for computers in middle school, we bought him the most advanced system we could afford. I remember Robert saying, "Helen, this boy is going to do something important with his life. Our job is to make sure he has the tools to do it." We were devoted parents, perhaps to a fault. When Daniel's Little League team needed new uniforms, Robert and I organized fundraisers and sold raffle tickets until we'd raised enough money for the best gear in the league. When Daniel wanted to attend computer camp in Colorado, the summer he turned 14, I took on extra bookkeeping clients to pay for it. When he got accepted to Arizona State University with plans to study computer science and business, we remortgaged our house to pay for his education. Looking back now, I can see that we might have made things too easy for him, but at the time, it felt like love. It felt like what good parents were supposed to do. Sacrifice so their children could have better lives than they did. Robert passed away suddenly when Daniel was 25, just 2 years out of college. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning, right there in our kitchen while he was reading the newspaper and drinking his coffee. One minute he was complaining about the Phoenix Suns' performance the night before, and the next minute he was gone, 63 years old, and I became a widow before I'd even figured out how to be an empty nester. The grief was overwhelming, but the business decisions I had to make came at me fast and hard. Robert's construction company was still operating, but the economy was struggling, and the housing market was beginning to show cracks that would later become the 2008 crisis. I had employees depending on their paychecks, contractors waiting for payment, and a business I understood from a bookkeeping perspective but had never actually run. Daniel stepped in immediately. Fresh out of college with his business degree and full of ideas about modernizing operations, he helped me analyze our options. We spent long nights at my kitchen table going through Robert's files and trying to make sense of the company's financial position. Daniel suggested we sell the business while it still had value, rather than risk losing everything if the market continued to decline. It was the right decision. We found a buyer within 6 months, a larger construction firm that wanted our client list and our reputation for quality work. After paying off debts and settling with employees, I walked away with just over $800,000. Not a fortune, but enough to ensure I'd never have to worry about paying my bills or maintaining my independence. Daniel had his own plans brewing. Even while he was helping me navigate Robert's business affairs, he was working on something he called the next big thing in customer service technology. He'd been developing software that would help businesses manage customer relationships more efficiently, and he was convinced it could revolutionize how companies handled everything, from sales leads to service complaints. "Mom," he told me one evening as we were finishing up the paperwork for the construction company sale, "I want to start my own tech company. I've got the software foundation, I've got the business plan, and I've got potential investors interested. but I need a startup capital to make it happen. The way he looked at me across that kitchen table, with Robert's determination in his eyes and my stubborn streak in his jaw, I knew what he was going to ask before he said it. I need $680,000. I know it's most of what you got from Dad's business, but, Mom, this could be huge. This could set us both up for life. Now, before you start thinking I was a foolish old woman who got taken advantage of by a smooth-talking son, let me explain the business arrangement we set up. This wasn't a loan or a gift. This was a legitimate investment partnership with contracts, percentages, and legal protections. Daniel's company, which he named StreamLine Solutions, was incorporated in Delaware for tax purposes, but operated out of Arizona. I became a silent partner with a 35% stake in the company. Daniel retained 51% ownership and controlling interest, while he set aside 14% for future investors and employee stock options. The partnership agreement, drawn up by James O'Connor and reviewed by a business attorney Daniel hired, was thorough and professional. My investment would be used for initial operating expenses, software development, marketing, and hiring the first round of employees. In return, I would receive 35% of any profits, 35% of any sale proceeds if the company was acquired, and a guaranteed seat on the board of directors. Daniel also insisted on paying me a modest monthly return on my investment, not enough to live on, but enough to cover my basic expenses and give me some spending money. Mom, I don't want you to worry about bills while we're getting this company off the ground, he said. This should cover your mortgage, utilities, and groceries, with a little left over for yourself. It was a fair arrangement, and truthfully, I was proud to be part of Daniel's dream. I'd spent 35 years watching Robert build something from nothing, and now I was getting the chance to do the same thing with my son. The monthly payments started right on schedule, and Daniel kept me updated on the company's progress with quarterly reports and phone calls. StreamLine Solutions started small. Daniel, 2 programmers he'd known since college, and a part-time marketing consultant working out of a shared office space in downtown Phoenix. But the software they were developing was genuinely innovative. Instead of businesses having to use separate systems for sales tracking, customer service, inventory management, and billing, StreamLine's platform integrated everything into one user-friendly interface. The first year was challenging. Daniel worked 18-hour days, debugging code and meeting with potential clients. There were nights when he'd call me at 10 or 11 o'clock, exhausted and frustrated, wondering if he'd made a mistake leaving his secure job at a software company to chase this dream. But I'd remind him of his father's perseverance, how Robert had struggled for years to build our construction business, and how success rarely came without sacrifice. Your daddy used to say that the difference between successful people and everyone else isn't talent or luck, I'd tell Daniel. It's persistence. You keep going when everyone else gives up. By the second year, StreamLine had landed their first major client, a regional restaurant chain that needed to coordinate ordering systems across 43 locations. The contract was worth $200,000 annually, and suddenly, Daniel's little company had credibility and cash flow. More clients followed: a medical equipment distributor, a furniture manufacturer, a property management company that oversaw apartment complexes throughout the Southwest. Daniel hired more employees, moved to a proper office building, and started talking about expanding beyond Arizona. He was featured in a local business magazine as one of Phoenix's rising stars under 40, and he sent me a framed copy of the article for my mantelpiece. In the photo, he looked so much like his father, confident and determined, but with a humility that comes from understanding how hard it is to build something worthwhile. The monthly payments to me increased as the company grew. What had started as $1,200 a month became $1,500, then $2,000, then $2,500. Daniel was always punctual with these payments, and he'd often include a handwritten note with the check, updating me on new contracts or thanking me for believing in him. I was living comfortably in my paid-off house in Tempe, taking painting classes at the community center, volunteering at the local food bank, and traveling occasionally to visit old friends. It wasn't an extravagant lifestyle, but it was secure and peaceful. More importantly, I felt like I was part of something meaningful, helping my son build a business that was creating jobs and serving customers throughout the region. Around Daniel's third year in business, he started dating Megan Patterson, a marketing executive from Los Angeles, who'd moved to Phoenix for a job with a luxury resort chain. Megan was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that comes from professional styling and regular spa treatments. She was intelligent and well-educated, with an MBA from UCLA and experience working for Fortune 500 companies. But from the first time Daniel brought her to Sunday dinner at my house, something about Megan rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was the way she checked her phone constantly during our conversation, or how she seemed surprised that Daniel's mother lived in such a quaint neighborhood. When I served pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans, the same meal I'd been making for Sunday dinner since Daniel was a boy, she asked if I had anything lighter because she was watching her carbs. Daniel was smitten, though. He'd always been attracted to confident, ambitious women, and Megan certainly fit that description. She was 5 years older than him, which seemed to add to her appeal in his eyes. He'd mention her constantly during our phone calls, how she was helping him think about StreamLine's marketing strategy, how she'd introduced him to contacts in California, how she was encouraging him to think bigger about the company's potential. They moved in together after dating for 8 months, renting a sleek downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Phoenix skyline. Daniel was proud of that place, loved showing it off when I came to visit. Megan had decorated it with modern furniture and abstract art, everything clean and minimalist and expensive-looking. "Mom, can you believe this is where your son lives now?" Daniel said during one of my visits, gesturing toward the panoramic view. Sometimes I look around and can't believe how far we've come. I was happy for him, truly, but I also noticed that our relationship started changing around this time. Instead of calling me 2 or 3 times a week, Daniel's calls became more sporadic. When we did talk, Megan was often there, and I could hear her making comments in the background or Daniel explaining something to her in the middle of our conversation. The Sunday dinners at my house, which had been a tradition since Robert died, gradually became less frequent. Daniel would text me on Saturday night saying they had prior commitments or that Megan had made reservations somewhere. When they did come, Megan would spend most of the time on her phone or making suggestions about how I could update my kitchen or modernize my living room. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Young career women were different from my generation. They had different priorities and communication styles. Maybe Megan wasn't being rude. Maybe she was just focused on building her own career and helping Daniel with his. Maybe I was being overly sensitive because I missed the close relationship Daniel and I had always shared. StreamLine Solutions continued to grow rapidly during Daniel's 4th and 5th years in business. They landed a major contract with a chain of automotive service centers that had locations across 3 states. They developed a specialized version of their software for healthcare providers, which opened up an entirely new market. Daniel hired a chief technology officer, a director of sales, and a full-time accounting staff. The company moved to a larger office building in Scottsdale, a modern complex with glass facades and manicured landscaping that screamed success. When Daniel gave me a tour of the new facilities, I was amazed by how professional everything looked. There were conference rooms with video conferencing equipment, a break room that looked like something from a magazine, and enough office space for 50 employees. "Mom, we're projected to hit $12 million in revenue this year," Daniel told me as we stood in his corner office, looking out at the mountains beyond the city. $12 million. Can you believe that? 5 years ago, this was just an idea. And now we're competing with companies that have been around for decades. The monthly payments to me had increased to $3,500, and Daniel had mentioned the possibility of a significant bonus payment at the end of the year if the company hit its revenue targets. More importantly, he'd started talking about potential acquisition offers from larger technology companies that were interested in StreamLine's customer base and proprietary software. "We've had 3 serious inquiries in the past 6 months," he said. "Companies that see what we've built and want to buy us out. Megan thinks we should consider it. The offers are substantial." When I asked what substantial meant, Daniel hesitated before answering. "The most recent offer was for $8.9 million, Mom. If we took that deal, your share would be over $3 million. $3 million. I sat in my car in that Scottsdale parking lot for 10 minutes after leaving Daniel's office, trying to wrap my mind around those numbers. The girl from Bisbee who'd grown up in a house with no air conditioning and hand-me-down clothes was looking at the possibility of becoming a millionaire because she'd believed in her son's dream. But Daniel seemed conflicted about selling. "StreamLine is my baby, Mom. It's what Dad would have built if he'd lived long enough. I'm not sure I'm ready to give up control, even for that kind of money." I told him to take his time, to think it through carefully. "Money is wonderful, honey, but pride in your work matters too. Your father always said that if you love what you do, the money will follow." What I didn't know was that while Daniel was wrestling with the decision about selling his company, Megan was already spending money as if the sale was a done deal. The first sign that something was changing came about 6 months before my trip to Scottsdale. Daniel called to tell me that he and Megan had bought a house. Not just any house, but a 4,000-square-foot custom home in one of Scottsdale's most exclusive neighborhoods. "Mom, you have to see this place," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "It's got 5 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, a 3-car garage, and a pool that looks like something from a resort." Megan found it through her contacts in the luxury real estate market. When I asked about the price, Daniel's answer nearly knocked me off my feet. $2.4 million. I know it sounds like a lot, but, Mom, this is an investment property. Real estate in this area has been appreciating at 15% annually. Plus, Megan says it's important for my professional image to live in the right neighborhood. $2.4 million. I tried to keep the shock out of my voice as I congratulated him, but internally, I was doing math that didn't add up. Even with StreamLine's success, Daniel's personal income from the company was maybe $300,000 a year. How was he qualifying for a mortgage on a house that cost more than he made in 8 years? "We put down 20%, Daniel explained when I gently asked about the financing. "Megan had some savings from her previous job, and I liquidated some of my stock options from the company. Plus, the bank was very accommodating once they saw StreamLine's revenue projections. I should have asked more questions. I should have requested to see the financial documents, or insisted on understanding exactly how this purchase was structured. But Daniel was 33 years old, a successful business owner, and I didn't want to seem like an interfering mother who questioned his financial decisions. The second sign came 2 months later, when Daniel mentioned that he and Megan were planning an extended European vacation, 3 weeks touring Italy, France, and Spain, staying in 5-star hotels, and taking cooking classes in Tuscany. Megan's always wanted to see Europe, and we've been working so hard that we deserve some time to celebrate everything we've accomplished," Daniel said. "Plus, it's a good tax write-off because we're researching potential international markets for StreamLine. The vacation photos they posted on social media showed meals that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Hotel suites with marble bathrooms and private balconies, and shopping expeditions that included designer clothes and expensive jewelry. In one photo, Megan was wearing a watch that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. But the third sign was the one that really worried me. Daniel called in late February to tell me that he was restructuring the company's payment schedule for investors. Mom, I need to reduce your monthly payment temporarily while we reinvest profits back into the company. Instead of $3,500 a month, I'll be sending you $1,500. It's just for 6 months while we upgrade our software infrastructure and hire additional developers. $1,500. That would barely cover my basic expenses: mortgage, utilities, groceries, and insurance. When I asked Daniel if there were financial problems at StreamLine, he assured me that business was better than ever. It's not about problems, Mom. It's about growth. We have an opportunity to double our market share if we make the right investments now. Megan's been working with our financial advisor to optimize our cash flow, and temporarily reducing investor payments is part of that strategy. I agreed to the reduced payments because I trusted Daniel, and because $1,500 was still enough to maintain my modest lifestyle. But something about the timing bothered me. The payment reduction came just 2 weeks after Daniel had posted photos from a weekend ski trip to Aspen, where he and Megan had stayed at a resort that charged $800 a night. The fourth sign was the most concerning. In April, Daniel called to tell me that he was considering bringing in additional investors to help fund StreamLine's expansion. There's a venture capital firm in California that's very interested in what we're doing, he said. They're talking about investing $5 million, which would give us the capital we need to go national. The only thing is, bringing in new investors would dilute existing ownership percentages. When I asked what that meant for my 35% stake, Daniel's explanation was vague and filled with business jargon that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. Your actual percentage would decrease, but the overall value of your investment would increase because the company would be worth so much more. It's complicated, Mom, but Megan's been working with lawyers to make sure everyone's interests are protected. I asked Daniel to send me the paperwork so I could have James O'Connor review it, but Daniel said the documents weren't ready yet, and that everything was still in preliminary negotiations. I'll keep you updated, Mom. Don't worry about any of this. I would never do anything that wasn't in your best interest. But I was starting to worry. The reduced payments, the expensive lifestyle, the vague explanations about company restructuring. Individually, these things might have been explained away, but together, they formed a pattern that made me uncomfortable. I made an appointment with James O'Connor to review my original partnership agreement with Daniel and to discuss my concerns about these recent developments. Helen, you have significant protections built into your contract, James assured me after reviewing the documents. Daniel can't dilute your ownership below 25% without your written consent. He can't sell the company without giving you 30 days' notice and the opportunity to review all financial documents. And he certainly can't unilaterally change your payment schedule without justification. When I mentioned that Daniel had already reduced my monthly payments, James frowned. Based on this agreement, he needed to provide you with detailed financial statements, showing why the reduction was necessary. Have you received those statements? I hadn't. When I called Daniel to ask about the financial documentation, he said he'd been too busy to prepare the formal reports, but that he'd get them to me soon. Mom, you're overthinking this, he said when I pressed for specifics. StreamLine is doing great. We're just managing cash flow differently while we navigate some growth opportunities. I promise you, your investment is completely secure. But promises and documentation are two different things. I asked James to send Daniel a formal letter requesting the financial statements required by our partnership agreement. The letter was polite but firm, explaining that I needed to understand the company's current financial position and the justification for the reduced payments. Daniel's response came not through James's office, but in a phone call to me directly, and for the first time in our relationship, my son was angry with me. Mom, I can't believe you sent a lawyer's letter to my company like I'm some kind of criminal. Don't you trust me? Don't you believe that I would always do right by you? I tried to explain that reviewing financial documents was a normal part of any business relationship, that even family members needed to maintain proper records and communication. But Daniel seemed to take my request as a personal attack on his character and integrity. "Megan says this is exactly the kind of thing that can damage family relationships," he said. "When you start treating your own son like a business adversary, instead of trusting him to take care of you." The conversation ended badly, with Daniel saying he was disappointed in my lack of faith in him, and me feeling guilty for having asked questions that any reasonable investor would ask. That was in early May. 2 weeks later, Daniel called with what seemed like an olive branch. "Mom, Megan and I want to invite you to come visit us in our new house. You haven't seen it yet, and we'd love to show you everything we've accomplished. Plus, we can sit down and go through all the financial information you wanted to see." A visit seemed like the perfect way to repair our relationship and address my business concerns in person, rather than through lawyers and formal letters. Daniel suggested I come for a long weekend in late May, when the Arizona weather would be perfect, and he'd have time to take me on a proper tour of the new StreamLine offices. "I'll book your flight, Mom. First class, so you can be comfortable, and we'll make sure you have the best visit ever." I was touched by the gesture, and relieved that Daniel seemed to be extending an effort to rebuild our relationship. Maybe I had been overly suspicious. Maybe Megan was right that involving lawyers had been unnecessary. Maybe this visit would remind both of us why family comes first, always. I should have known that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. The flight to Scottsdale was everything Daniel had promised. First-class accommodations, attentive service, and a smooth arrival at Sky Harbor Airport. Daniel met me at baggage claim with a warm hug and his familiar smile, looking successful and confident in an expensive suit that I didn't recognize. "Mom, you look wonderful," he said, as he loaded my suitcase into the back of a brand-new black Mercedes SUV. "Wait until you see the house. Megan's been working with an interior designer, and it's absolutely stunning." The drive from the airport to their neighborhood took us through parts of Scottsdale I'd never seen before. Gated communities with million-dollar homes, golf courses that looked like green carpets in the desert, and shopping centers filled with stores that probably charged more for a handbag than I spent on clothes in a year. Daniel's house was impressive. There was no denying that. Set back from the street behind perfectly manicured landscaping, it was all clean lines and neutral colors, with a 3-car garage and a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen vehicles. When we walked through the front door, I was struck by how spacious and elegant everything looked. High ceilings, marble floors, and furniture that belonged in a magazine. "This is the formal living room," Daniel said, gesturing toward a space filled with white couches and abstract art. "We don't use it much, but it's perfect for entertaining." Megan appeared from what I assumed was the kitchen, looking polished and perfect in workout clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her greeting was warm but seemed rehearsed, like she'd practiced the right tone and facial expression for welcoming her boyfriend's mother. "Helen, we're so excited you're here," she said, giving me a brief hug that felt more like an air kiss. "I can't wait to show you everything we've done with the house." The tour was overwhelming. 5 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom and walk-in closet, a kitchen with professional-grade appliances, and a wine refrigerator, a family room with a television that covered most of one wall, a home office with built-in shelving and a view of the mountains, and a master suite that was larger than the entire first floor of my house in Tempe. But it was the backyard that really took my breath away. The swimming pool looked like something from a luxury resort, complete with a waterfall, built-in seating areas, and a spa that could accommodate 8 people. There was an outdoor kitchen with a pizza oven, a fire pit surrounded by comfortable seating, and a putting green that Daniel used to practice his golf game. "Daniel, this is absolutely beautiful," I said, and I meant it. "You and Megan have created something really special here." But even as I admired the house, I couldn't stop doing mental math. The furniture alone must have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The pool and outdoor kitchen were probably worth more than most people's annual salaries. Even if Daniel was making good money from StreamLine, how was he affording all of this? That first evening, Megan prepared dinner. Or rather, she heated up meals that had been delivered from an expensive catering service. Everything was delicious and beautifully presented, served on china that looked like it belonged in a museum. We sat at a dining room table that could seat 12 people, drinking wine that Daniel said was from a vineyard he and Megan had visited during their European vacation. The conversation was pleasant, but felt strangely formal. Daniel talked about StreamLine's latest contracts and his plans for expanding into new markets. Megan discussed her work with the resort chain and her ideas for optimizing Daniel's personal brand. I shared updates about my volunteer work and the painting classes I'd been taking, but something felt off. When I asked specific questions about the business, revenue numbers, profit margins, client retention rates, Daniel's answers were vague and often redirected to other topics. When I mentioned wanting to see the financial statements he'd promised, Megan suggested we save business talk for tomorrow, so we could focus on quality family time. I stayed in what Megan called the guest suite, a bedroom with its own sitting area and bathroom that was nicer than any hotel I'd ever visited. But as I lay in that king-sized bed under Egyptian cotton sheets, I couldn't shake the feeling that this entire visit was somehow staged, like Daniel and Megan were performing the roles of successful young couple, rather than actually living their lives. The second day of my visit, Daniel took me on a tour of the new StreamLine offices. The building was impressive, and the workspace was filled with young, energetic employees who seemed genuinely excited about their work. Daniel introduced me to several key staff members, and I could see the pride in his eyes as he showed me around. "Mom, this is what we built together," he said as we stood in the conference room where major client presentations took place. "Your investment made all of this possible." It was a proud moment, and I felt the warm satisfaction that comes from seeing your child succeed. But when I asked to see current financial statements or to speak with the company's accountant, Daniel said those meetings would have to wait. "Our CFO is traveling this week, and the financial reports are being updated by our accounting firm," he explained. "But I promise we'll go through everything in detail before you leave." That afternoon, while Daniel was at the office finishing up some urgent business, Megan and I spent time together at the house. She showed me her walk-in closet, which was filled with designer clothes, shoes, and handbags that represented more money than I'd ever spent on personal items in my entire life. "Daniel is so generous," Megan said as she showed me a handbag that she mentioned cost only $3,000. "He wants me to look the part of a successful executive's girlfriend. Image is so important in business." As we sat by the pool that afternoon, Megan began talking about her vision for Daniel's future, and by extension, their future together. "Daniel has so much potential, but he needs to think bigger," she said, sipping a cocktail that she'd prepared with ingredients from their fully stocked bar. "StreamLine could be worth $50 million within 5 years if he makes the right strategic decisions." When I asked what those strategic decisions might involve, Megan's explanation focused heavily on optimizing ownership structures and leveraging current assets for maximum growth potential. Much of what she said sounded like business school jargon, but the underlying message was clear. Daniel needed to restructure his company in ways that would maximize the value for future investors. Of course, that might mean reducing payments to current investors temporarily, Megan added casually. But in the long run, everyone would benefit from increased company valuation. I was beginning to understand that my reduced monthly payments weren't temporary adjustments for cash flow management. They were part of a deliberate strategy to free up money for Daniel and Megan's lifestyle, while positioning the company for a lucrative sale. That evening we went to dinner at a restaurant that required reservations months in advance, and charged $45 for appetizers. Daniel ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a month, and Megan insisted we try the tasting menu that included 7 courses of tiny, artfully arranged portions. The conversation during dinner focused on their upcoming plans, a couple's retreat in Napa Valley the following month, a possible investment in a vacation home in San Diego, and Megan's idea to start her own consulting business that would help emerging entrepreneurs optimize their personal and professional brands. "We're really focusing on experiences over things," Megan explained as she photographed each course of our meal. "Life is short, and we want to make sure we're living it to the fullest." I noticed that all of these experiences were expensive, and that none of their future plans seemed to include anyone but themselves. When I mentioned that I'd love to visit them again soon, Megan's response was polite but distant. "Of course, Helen. We just have such busy schedules with travel and work commitments. Maybe we could plan something for later in the year." But it was then that I realized this visit wasn't meant to repair our relationship or address my business concerns. It was meant to be a farewell tour, a chance for Daniel to show me what he'd accomplished before he moved on to the next phase of his life, which apparently didn't include much room for his mother. The 3rd day of my visit was when everything fell apart. I woke up early, as I always do, and decided to sit by the pool with my coffee and watch the sunrise over the mountains. Arizona mornings are magical. The air is cool and clean, and the light turns the desert landscape into something that looks like a painting. I was enjoying the peaceful silence when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Daniel and Megan were having what sounded like an intense conversation, and even though I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, their voices were carrying clearly through the open sliding doors. "Need to wrap this up quickly," Megan was saying. "The longer she stays, the more questions she's going to ask." "I know, but she's my mother," Daniel replied. "I can't just kick her out." "You're not kicking her out. You're managing the situation. We've shown her the house. You've taken her to the office, and she's had her visit. Now we need to focus on Napa and getting the final paperwork signed for the new investors. What if she wants to see the actual financial statements? She's been asking about them since she got here. Daniel, she's a 66-year-old woman from Tempe who's never run anything bigger than a household budget. Even if you showed her the real numbers, she wouldn't understand what they mean. Just give her some simplified summary and send her home happy." My hands were shaking as I set down my coffee cup. They were talking about me like I was a naive old woman who could be managed and manipulated, someone whose legitimate business concerns could be dismissed with simplified summaries and patronizing explanations. But the next part of their conversation was even worse. "The venture capital firm wants to close the deal within 60 days, Megan continued. "Once that happens, your mother's ownership percentage becomes essentially meaningless. She'll have maybe 5% of a much larger company, which sounds impressive but actually reduces her actual influence to nothing. She's going to figure that out eventually. Not if we handle it correctly. By the time she realizes what happened, the new investment structure will already be in place. She can complain all she wants, but the legal agreements will be bulletproof." I felt sick to my stomach. They were planning to dilute my ownership in StreamLine to almost nothing, using legal maneuvers that would technically comply with our partnership agreement, while completely undermining the spirit of our original arrangement. "What about her monthly payments?" Daniel asked. "Once the company is restructured, we can justify reducing them even further. Maybe $500 a month, just enough to keep her quiet. She doesn't need much money anyway. She lives in that little house and doesn't do anything expensive. $500 a month. After investing $680,000 in my son's company, they were planning to reduce my return to barely enough to cover my basic utilities. Sometimes I feel bad about all this," Daniel said quietly. "Don't." Megan's voice was firm. "This is business, not charity. Your mother got to feel important and involved for a few years, and she's going to get her initial investment back eventually. But StreamLine is our future, not hers. She needs to understand that her role in this company was always temporary. I sat by that pool for another hour, watching the sun rise over the mountains and trying to process what I'd just heard. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed for and believed in, and supported through every challenge of his life, was planning to steal my financial security while his girlfriend convinced him it was just smart business. When Daniel and Megan finally came outside, they were all smiles and cheerful greetings, as if they hadn't just been discussing how to manipulate and deceive me. "Good morning, Mom. You're up early. How did you sleep?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This wasn't the Daniel who used to bring me dandelions and tell me I was the prettiest mama in the world. This wasn't even the Daniel who had asked for my investment 5 years ago, with tears in his eyes and promises that we'd build something together. This was a man who had learned to see his own mother as a business obstacle to be managed. "I slept fine, honey," I said, forcing a smile. "What are our plans for today?" Our last day together was a masterpiece of deception on their part and careful observation on mine. Daniel took me to breakfast at a country club where he was apparently a member, introducing me to other successful young business people who all seemed to know about StreamLine's recent success. Megan joined us later, looking perfectly put together in a tennis outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Helen, you must be so proud of Daniel," one woman said to me over mimosas and eggs Benedict. "Megan was just telling us about StreamLine's expansion plans. It sounds like you're going to be very wealthy soon." I smiled and nodded and played the role of the proud mother, but internally I was analyzing every word, every gesture, every interaction. This wasn't a casual brunch. It was a performance designed to reinforce the narrative that Daniel was a successful entrepreneur, and I was the lucky mother who had invested in his vision. After brunch, we went shopping at Fashion Square, one of Scottsdale's upscale malls. Megan suggested we visit some of the high-end stores, ostensibly so I could treat myself to something special as a memento of my visit. But I noticed that every store we entered was one where Daniel and Megan were clearly regular customers. Sales associates greeted them by name, knew their preferences, and offered private shopping services. At one boutique, Megan selected a silk scarf that cost $400 and suggested Daniel buy it for me as a gift. "Helen would look lovely in this color," she said, holding it up to my face, while a sales clerk nodded approvingly. Daniel purchased the scarf without hesitation, adding it to what appeared to be a significant existing account at the store. As we left, I caught a glimpse of his receipt. This one purchase was part of a monthly bill that exceeded $3,000. That afternoon, we returned to the house so I could pack for my departure the next morning. Daniel had booked me on a first-class flight back to Phoenix, with a departure time that would get me home by early evening. As I folded my clothes and placed them in my suitcase, Megan knocked on the door of the guest room. "Helen, I hope you've enjoyed your visit," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, while I continued packing. "Daniel and I have loved having you here." She watched me for a moment before continuing. "I know you've had some concerns about the business, and I want you to know that Daniel really appreciates your patience while he navigates some complex financial decisions." I stopped packing and looked at her directly. "What kind of financial decisions?" "Well, you know, growth requires sacrifice sometimes. Daniel's been working with advisors to optimize StreamLine structure for maximum long-term value. It might mean some short-term adjustments, but the eventual payoff will be worth it." "What kind of adjustments?" Megan's smile never wavered, but I could see calculation behind her eyes. "Nothing that would affect your security, of course. Daniel would never do anything to jeopardize your well-being. It's just that, as the company evolves, everyone's role might evolve too." She was testing me, trying to gauge how much I suspected and how much resistance I might offer to their plans. I decided to test her right back. "I'm looking forward to reviewing those financial statements Daniel promised to show me." Oh, of course. Although, those documents can be quite technical. Daniel was thinking it might be easier to just give you a summary of the key points. I'd prefer to see the actual statements. My attorney likes to review these things properly. For just a moment, Megan's composure slipped. Your attorney? James O'Connor. He's been handling my business affairs since my husband died. He likes to stay informed about my investments. Megan recovered quickly. But I had seen enough. She was worried about legal oversight, which meant their plans weren't as bulletproof as she'd told Daniel that morning. Well, of course, that makes perfect sense, she said, standing up from the bed. I'm sure Daniel can arrange something with his accounting team. That evening, our farewell dinner was held at the house. Daniel grilled steaks by the pool, while Megan prepared sides in the kitchen. It should have been a lovely family evening, but I couldn't stop thinking about their conversation from that morning, their performance throughout the day, and Megan's careful probing during our private talk. As we sat around the patio table sharing a meal and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Daniel raised his glass for a toast. To family, he said, looking directly at me. To the people who believe in us and support our dreams. To family, I repeated, clinking my glass against his and Megan's. But in my mind, I was thinking about what family really means. Loyalty, honesty, protection, and respect, none of which seemed to be present in their plans for my future. After dinner, as I was getting ready for bed, Daniel knocked on my door. Mom, I just wanted to say thank you for coming out here. I know it means a lot to Megan and me to share our success with you. He sat down on the chair by the window, looking more serious than he had all weekend. I also want you to know that no matter what happens with the business, you'll always be taken care of. I would never let anything happen to you financially. It was almost like he was trying to ease his conscience before implementing their plan. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and supported through every challenge of his life, and realized that he genuinely believed he was being generous and responsible by reducing my investment returns to practically nothing. Daniel, what exactly do you think is going to happen with the business? Well, growth and change are inevitable. StreamLine might look very different a year from now than it does today. Different how? New investors, new structure, new opportunities. But Mom, you have to trust me to make the right decisions. I've never steered you wrong before. I wanted to ask him about the venture capital deal, about the ownership dilution, about their plan to reduce my monthly payments to $500. I wanted to confront him with what I'd overheard that morning and demand honest answers to all my questions. But I had learned something important during this visit. Daniel was no longer the son who would tell me the truth when I asked for it. He had become someone who would manage me, manipulate me, and lie to me, while believing he was protecting me from information I was too naive to understand. So instead I hugged him goodnight and told him I loved him and that I was proud of everything he had accomplished. I love you too, Mom. Sweet dreams. As I lay in that expensive guest bed, listening to the sounds of Daniel and Megan cleaning up downstairs, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow I would fly home to Tempe as planned, but I wouldn't be the naive, trusting mother they expected. I would be a businesswoman who had just discovered that her investment partners were planning to cheat her, and I would respond accordingly. The next morning, Daniel drove me to the airport, chatting casually about my next visit and his plans for the summer. As he helped me with my luggage at the departure curb, he handed me an envelope. Just a little something extra for your trip home, he said with a smile. And Mom, I'll get those financial statements to you within the next couple weeks. The envelope contained $500 in cash, exactly the amount Megan had suggested for my future monthly payments. It felt like a down payment on their plan to reduce my income. Thank you, honey. Have a safe flight home. I kissed my son goodbye, walked into the terminal, and checked in for my first-class flight to Phoenix. But as I sat in the departure lounge waiting for my boarding announcement, I was already planning what I would do when I got home. And the first call I was going to make was to James O'Connor. The flight attendant was just beginning the safety demonstration when my phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. "Mom, change of plans. I had to cancel your flight home because we need the money for an emergency at the company. Megan booked you a room at the Marriott for a few more days until we can sort this out. Sorry for the confusion." I read the message 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. Cancel my flight? We need the money? Book me a hotel room? A second text came through. "Actually, this works out perfectly. You and Megan need some space to bond without me around. Think of it as a girls' trip. She has some great ideas for how you can spend your time." Then a third message. "Mom, we need space. You're smothering us. I need to focus on business right now without family drama." I sat in that airplane seat, holding my phone and trying to process what had just happened. My son had canceled my flight home without asking me, essentially stranding me in Scottsdale, and was now telling me I was smothering him and creating family drama. But it was the casual mention of needing the money that really caught my attention. If Daniel's company was doing as well as he claimed, why would the cost of one plane ticket create a financial emergency? The flight attendant approached my seat. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but it appears your reservation has been canceled. You'll need to gather your belongings and deplane." The humiliation of walking back through that airplane, past passengers who were settled in their seats and ready for departure, while carrying my purse and jacket, was nothing compared to the rage building in my chest. At the airline customer service counter, I learned the details of what Daniel had done. He had called the airline and canceled my reservation, citing a family emergency that required me to extend my stay. Because the flight was booked and paid for by him, the airline had processed the cancellation without contacting me directly. "I'd like to book a new flight home today," I told the customer service representative. "Of course, ma'am. Let me see what's available." She typed on her computer for a few minutes before frowning at the screen. "I'm showing that there's a note on your profile indicating that all future bookings need to be approved by the account holder. That would be Daniel Westbrook. Daniel had not only canceled my flight, he had put a hold on my ability to book new flights using the airline system. This is ridiculous," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm a grown woman. I can book my own flights. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but these restrictions were put in place at the request of the account holder. You would need to book through a different airline or pay for a new reservation yourself." I looked at the departure board and saw that the next available flight to Phoenix on any airline wasn't until the following morning, and the cost of a last-minute ticket was over $800. Standing in that airport, with my canceled flight confirmation in one hand and my phone full of dismissive text messages in the other, I realized that my son had just played the opening move in what he thought was a carefully orchestrated plan to manage and control me. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the wrong woman. I called a taxi to take me to the Marriott, where I found that Daniel had indeed booked me a room for 3 nights, with instructions that all charges were to be billed to his credit card. The reservation note indicated that I was a family guest who needed supervised accommodation, while personal matters were resolved. Supervised accommodation. Like I was an elderly relative who couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. The hotel room was lovely, a suite with a view of the mountains and all the amenities anyone could want. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the unexpected vacation. But these weren't different circumstances. These were circumstances that required immediate and decisive action. I sat on the bed in that hotel room, looking out at the Arizona desert that had been my home for 66 years, and pulled out my phone to make the call that would change everything. "James, it's Helen Westbrook. I need you to file those dissolution papers immediately." "Helen, what's happened? You sound upset." "My son just canceled my flight home and told me I need to give him space because I'm smothering him. He stranded me in Scottsdale, like I'm some kind of burden he needs to manage." There was a long pause on James's end of the line. Helen, that's actually a form of elder abuse, financial manipulation, and isolation tactics. Well, if that's what Daniel wants to call it, then he's about to learn what real financial manipulation looks like. I explained everything I had discovered during my visit. The overheard conversation about diluting my ownership, Megan's casual comments about reducing my payments, Daniel's evasive answers about the company's finances, and now this final insult of canceling my travel arrangements without my consent. I want every penny of my investment back, James. Not just the original $680,000. I want my full share of the current company valuation. If StreamLine is worth $8.9 million, then my 35% stake is worth $3.1 million. Helen, are you certain about this? Once we file dissolution papers, there's no going back. This will fundamentally change your relationship with Daniel. I looked out that hotel room window at the mountains beyond Scottsdale, thinking about the boy who used to bring me dandelions and the man who had just told me I was smothering him. James, my relationship with Daniel changed the moment he decided to treat me like a naive old woman instead of his mother and business partner. I'm just making it official. James O'Connor had been practicing law for 32 years, but he told me later that he'd never had a client who was simultaneously so calm and so determined to pursue complete legal warfare against their own child. Helen, I need you to understand exactly what we're doing here, he said during our phone conversation from my hotel room. When we file for dissolution of the partnership and demand immediate buyout at current market valuation, we're essentially forcing Daniel to choose between paying you $3.1 million within 30 days or allowing the company to be sold to satisfy your claim. I understand perfectly, James. Most successful small businesses don't have that kind of liquid capital available. Daniel will likely have to seek emergency financing, sell company assets, or find a buyer willing to complete a rapid acquisition. Good. Maybe that will teach him the difference between managing his mother and managing his business. James was quiet for a moment before continuing. There's something else you need to consider. Daniel could contest this action, claim that you're acting irrationally, or that there are factors we don't understand about the company's current situation. Then he'll have to provide the financial documentation he's been avoiding for months. James, I want discovery rights to every financial record, every bank account, every expense report, and every contract StreamLine has entered into for the past 2 years. Helen, that's going to be very expensive for them to comply with. James, in the past year, my son spent more money on wine and vacations than most people make in salary. He bought a $2.4 million house while reducing my monthly payments and telling me it was for cash flow management. Either he's been lying to me about the company's financial situation, or he's been using company resources to fund his personal lifestyle. Either way, I want answers. Over the next 4 hours, James and I developed what he later described as the most comprehensive partnership dissolution strategy I've ever filed. The legal documents we prepared didn't just demand my investment return. They systematically dismantled every aspect of Daniel's control over StreamLine Solutions. The first document was a formal notice of partnership dissolution, citing breach of fiduciary duty, failure to provide required financial statements, and violation of the payment schedule outlined in our original agreement. This document gave Daniel 30 days to buy out my 35% stake at current market valuation or face forced sale of company assets. The second document was a demand for immediate access to all financial records, including bank statements, tax returns, expense reports, contracts, and correspondence related to the venture capital deal Megan had mentioned. This discovery request also included Daniel's personal financial records, since company funds appeared to be supporting his lifestyle. The third document was the most devastating, a formal complaint alleging financial elder abuse and requesting court supervision of all future business decisions until the partnership was dissolved. This complaint would be filed with both the state attorney general's office and the local district attorney, potentially triggering a criminal investigation into Daniel's handling of my investment. James, I want every legal protection available to investors my age who've been manipulated by family members. Helen, elder abuse charges are serious. If the DA's office finds evidence of financial manipulation, Daniel could face criminal prosecution. Then he shouldn't have manipulated me. But the fourth document was my personal favorite. A cease and desist order preventing Daniel from making any major business decisions, entering into new contracts, or transferring company assets without my written approval until the partnership dissolution was complete. This essentially gives you veto power over every aspect of StreamLine's operations, James explained. Good. For 5 years, Daniel has been making decisions about my investment without consulting me. Now he'll understand what it feels like to have someone else control his financial future. We also prepared a media strategy. James had contacts at several business publications that covered Phoenix's tech industry, and we drafted a press release announcing my departure from StreamLine and the reasons for the partnership dissolution. Helen, are you sure you want this to become public? It could damage Daniel's reputation in the business community. James, Daniel just spent 3 days showing me off to his country club friends and business associates, telling everyone how proud they should be of his success. Now they can learn the truth about how he treats the people who made that success possible. By 6 o'clock that evening, all the paperwork was complete. James would file the documents first thing Monday morning, which meant Daniel would be served with legal papers while he was at his office, surrounded by the employees and colleagues he'd been impressing with his business acumen. But I wasn't finished planning. While James handled the legal strategy, I was developing what I called my financial intelligence operation. If Daniel and Megan thought they could keep me in the dark about StreamLine's real financial situation, they were about to learn how resourceful a determined 66-year-old woman could be. I started by using the hotel's business center to research StreamLine Solutions online. What I found was fascinating and infuriating. The company's website had been recently updated with press releases announcing several major new contracts that Daniel had never mentioned to me. According to these announcements, StreamLine had signed deals worth over $4 million in combined annual revenue just in the past 6 months. $4 million in new contracts, but Daniel had reduced my monthly payments because of cash flow challenges. I also found social media posts from Megan's accounts that showed a detailed timeline of their spending over the past year. The European vacation had cost at least $50,000, based on the hotels, restaurants, and shopping expeditions she'd documented. Their weekend ski trips, spa retreats, and fine dining experiences added up to another $30,000 in discretionary spending. But the most interesting discovery came from LinkedIn, where Daniel had posted updates about StreamLine's exciting growth trajectory and upcoming strategic partnerships. In one post from just 2 weeks earlier, he had announced that StreamLine was evaluating multiple acquisition offers from Fortune 500 companies. Multiple acquisition offers. Not just the one he'd mentioned to me, but several companies interested in buying StreamLine, which meant the $8.9 million valuation he'd shared was probably conservative. I called James back with this new information. James, I think Daniel's been lying about everything. The company isn't struggling with cash flow. It's incredibly successful and attracting multiple buyers. My reduced payments weren't about business necessity. They were about freeing up money for his personal spending. Helen, if you're right about this, then Daniel's breach of fiduciary duty is even more serious than we initially thought. I want you to hire a private investigator to document their spending patterns and lifestyle. I want photographs of the house, records of their travel expenses, and evidence of every luxury purchase they've made in the past year. Are you sure about this? Private investigators are expensive. James, I have $500 in cash that Daniel gave me yesterday as a goodbye gift. It's the exact amount Megan suggested for my future monthly payments. Use that money to start the investigation. I think Daniel would appreciate the irony. Over the next 2 days, while I remained in my Scottsdale hotel room, James assembled what he called the most thorough partnership dissolution case I've ever prepared. The private investigator, a retired police detective named Maria Santos, had worked elder fraud cases for 15 years and knew exactly what evidence would be most damaging in court. Maria's preliminary report was devastating. In the past 18 months, Daniel and Megan had spent over $200,000 on luxury items, travel, and entertainment, all while reducing my investment returns and claiming the company needed to conserve cash. Mrs. Westbrook, I've seen this pattern before, Maria told me during our phone conversation. Successful adult children who view their parents' investments as personal ATM machines, rather than legitimate business partnerships. The spending escalates over time, and the financial manipulation becomes more sophisticated. What's the best way to prove this in court? Documentation, bank records, credit card statements, receipts, and witness testimony from people who have observed their lifestyle. I can have a complete financial profile prepared within a week. But I wanted more than just financial documentation. I wanted Daniel and Megan to understand that their actions had consequences beyond legal paperwork. Maria, I also want you to compile a list of every person they've impressed with their wealth over the past year. Business associates, country club members, neighbors, social media followers. I want them to know that their lifestyle was funded by manipulating a 66-year-old woman who trusted her son. Mrs. Westbrook, that's going to be very embarrassing for them. Good. They should be embarrassed. What they did was shameful. By Friday morning, I had a complete legal and investigative strategy prepared. But I also had something else, a sense of purpose and empowerment that I hadn't felt since Robert died 7 years earlier. For too long, I had allowed other people to make decisions about my life and my money. I had trusted Daniel to handle my investment properly, assumed that family loyalty would protect me from being taken advantage of, and believed that being a supportive mother meant accepting whatever my son told me without question. But this week in Scottsdale had taught me that being a good mother sometimes means holding your children accountable for their choices, even when those choices hurt you personally. Saturday morning, I did something that surprised even me. I extended my hotel stay for another week and rented a car. If Daniel thought I needed space to figure out my place in his life, then I was going to use that space to conduct the most thorough investigation of his business practices and personal character that any mother had ever undertaken. James, I'm not going home until this is finished. Helen, what do you mean? I mean, I'm staying in Scottsdale until Daniel either pays me what he owes or agrees to sell the company. I want to be here to watch his face when he realizes that his naive old mother just outmaneuvered him. Helen, that could take months. Then I'll stay for months. James, for 5 years, I've been the silent partner who asked polite questions and accepted vague answers. Now I'm going to be the active partner who demands complete transparency and accountability. That weekend, I drove around Scottsdale in my rental car, documenting Daniel and Megan's lifestyle and gathering information about their spending patterns. I visited the country club where we'd had brunch, the restaurants where they were regular customers, and the boutiques where they maintained monthly accounts. At each location, I introduced myself as Daniel's mother and mentioned that I was considering making additional investments in his business. The response was always the same: enthusiastic praise for Daniel's success and detailed stories about his generous spending. "Oh, Mrs. Westbrook, your son is such a good customer," the sales associate at the boutique told me. "He and Megan were just in here last week, and they spent over $4,000 on outfits for their trip to Napa Valley. $4,000 on clothes for a weekend trip. while telling me that company cash flow required reducing my monthly payments. By Sunday evening, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Daniel and Megan's lifestyle, spending patterns, and social activities. The evidence was overwhelming. They were living like millionaires while treating my investment like their personal discretionary fund. But I had also made a decision that would define the rest of this battle. I wasn't just fighting for my money or my legal rights. I was fighting for every mother and grandmother who had been manipulated by adult children who took their generosity for granted. James, when we serve Daniel with these papers, I want to make sure the story gets maximum media coverage. I want every business owner in Phoenix to know what happens when you steal from your investors, even if one of those investors is your mother. Helen, are you absolutely certain about this approach? I thought about that question as I sat in my hotel room Sunday night, looking out at the lights of Scottsdale and thinking about the boy who used to bring me dandelions and the man who had canceled my flight home. James, Daniel made his choice when he decided to treat me like a business obstacle instead of his mother. Now I'm making my choice about how to respond. Monday morning, I was going to remind my son that underestimating me was the biggest mistake he'd ever made in his life. At exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning, while Daniel was conducting his weekly staff meeting at StreamLine Solutions, a process server walked into the conference room and handed him a manila envelope containing 4 legal documents that would destroy his world. I wasn't there to see his face when he opened that envelope, but Maria Santos was. She had positioned herself in the coffee shop across from StreamLine's office building with a camera and a clear view of the conference room windows. Mrs. Westbrook, I've never seen anyone go from confident to panicked so quickly, Maria told me during our phone call an hour later. 1 minute he was standing at the whiteboard presenting to his staff, and the next minute he was staring at legal papers with his mouth hanging open. The first call came to my hotel room at 9:23 a.m. Mom, what the hell is this? Partnership dissolution? Financial elder abuse? Are you out of your mind? I let the phone ring 4 more times before answering. Good morning, Daniel. I trust you received the legal documents. Mom, we need to talk. This is insane. You can't just destroy my company because you're upset about a flight cancellation. Daniel, this isn't about the flight. This is about 5 years of financial manipulation, lies, and broken promises. This is about you reducing my monthly payments while spending thousands of dollars on wine and vacations. This is about you planning to dilute my ownership to practically nothing while pretending it was in my best interest. There was a long silence on Daniel's end of the line. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the conversation you and Megan had Friday morning by the pool, when you thought I was still asleep. I heard every word, Daniel. I know about the venture capital deal, the ownership restructuring, and your plan to reduce my payments to $500 a month. Another silence. Longer this time. Mom, you don't understand the complexities of business finance. Megan and I were just discussing options. Daniel, I understand enough to know when I'm being stolen from. I also understand enough to hire investigators, forensic accountants, and attorneys who specialize in elder financial abuse. Elder abuse? Mom, that's ridiculous. I would never. You already have. Canceling my flight without permission, putting restrictions on my ability to book new flights, reducing my investment returns while increasing your personal spending, lying about the company's financial performance, planning to dilute my ownership without proper notification. Daniel, any one of those actions constitutes financial elder abuse. Together they represent a pattern of deliberate manipulation. I could hear voices in the background, probably his staff trying to figure out why their boss was having a breakdown in the middle of a meeting. Mom, can we please discuss this privately? I'm at work and... Daniel, you made this a public matter when you served legal papers at my place of business. Speaking of which, you should know that I've scheduled a press conference for this afternoon to announce my departure from StreamLine and the reasons for the partnership dissolution. A press conference? Mom, you can't do that. It will destroy my reputation. Your reputation should be destroyed. You're a 38-year-old man who stole from his mother to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. That's not the kind of reputation anyone should want to protect. I never stole from you. Everything I did was legal. Legal and ethical are two different things, Daniel. What you did might have been technically legal, but it was morally bankrupt. And now you're going to face the consequences. The second call came 20 minutes later, from Megan. Helen, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Daniel is devastated by these legal papers. He never meant to hurt you. Megan, I heard you Friday morning. I heard you tell Daniel that I was too naive to understand financial statements, and that my role in the company was always meant to be temporary. I heard you discuss reducing my payments to $500 a month, while you planned expensive trips and talked about buying vacation homes. Helen, you're taking those comments out of context. We were just brainstorming about different scenarios. Megan, let me be very clear about something. I am not a naive old woman who can be managed with simplified explanations and patronizing treatment. I am a businesswoman with legal rights, financial resources, and a very good attorney. And right now I am furious. But Helen, family should come first. Surely we can work this out without involving lawyers and investigators. Family should come first, Megan. That's exactly why I'm so angry. Daniel forgot that I was family when he decided to treat me like a business obstacle. What do you want from us? The question I'd been waiting for. I want my full partnership stake bought out at current market valuation, $3.1 million, transferred to my account within 30 days. I want complete financial documentation for the past 2 years, including all personal expenses that were paid with company funds. And I want a public apology, acknowledging that my investment made StreamLine's success possible. $3 million? Helen, that's impossible. The company doesn't have that kind of liquid capital. Then Daniel will have to sell the company, or find investors willing to buy me out. Megan, you spent the weekend telling me how valuable StreamLine has become, and how many acquisition offers you've received. Now you can prove it. Helen, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm being more reasonable than you and Daniel were when you planned to reduce my monthly income to barely enough to cover my utilities. The third call came from Daniel again, 2 hours later. This time his voice was different, less confrontational, more desperate. Mom, I just got off the phone with our attorney. He says these legal papers he says they're very serious. They are serious, Daniel. He also says that the financial elder abuse complaint has been forwarded to the district attorney's office for review. Yes, it has. Mom, I could face criminal charges. This could destroy everything I've worked for. Daniel, you should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me. I never stole from you. I reduced your payments temporarily while we navigated a growth period. Daniel, let's skip the business jargon. You reduced my payments so you could spend more money on yourself. You planned to dilute my ownership so you could bring in new investors without sharing control. You canceled my flight home and told me I was smothering you because I asked to see financial statements that I'm legally entitled to review. Those aren't business decisions. They're betrayals. Mom, what do you want me to do? I want you to pay me what you owe me, $3.1 million. Plus interest and legal fees. I can't just write you a check for $3 million. Then sell the company, Daniel. You've told me how valuable it is and how many people want to buy it. Pick the best offer and close the deal. But Mom, StreamLine is my life's work. It's what Dad would have built if he'd lived longer. Daniel, your father would be ashamed of how you've treated me. He would never have stolen from his business partners. Especially not from his mother. There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. How long do I have? 30 days. After that, the court will order a forced sale of company assets to satisfy my claim. And the criminal investigation? That depends on what the DA's office finds when they review the evidence. If they determine that you knowingly manipulated and defrauded me, you'll face charges regardless of whether you pay me back. Mom, I never meant for any of this to happen. Daniel, what you meant doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what you did and how you're going to fix it. Over the next week, I watched from my hotel room as Daniel's carefully constructed world began to unravel. The press conference I'd scheduled for Monday afternoon had attracted attention from 3 local television stations and 2 business publications. By Tuesday morning, the story was being covered throughout Arizona's business community. The headlines were devastating. Local tech CEO accused of elder financial abuse. Mother files complaint against son's successful startup. And StreamLine Solutions faces partnership dissolution over investor fraud claims. But the media coverage was only the beginning. Maria Santos had compiled a comprehensive report documenting Daniel and Megan's spending patterns, and the evidence was damning. In 18 months, they had spent over $200,000 on luxury items and experiences while reducing my investment returns by $36,000 annually. The private investigator's report included photographs of their house, documentation of their travel expenses, receipts from high-end restaurants and boutiques, and testimony from service providers who had observed their lavish lifestyle. Most damaging of all were social media posts, where Megan had bragged about their expensive purchases and luxury experiences. Mrs. Westbrook, I've prepared a timeline showing exactly how your son's personal spending increased as your investment returns decreased, Maria told me during our Wednesday meeting. The correlation is undeniable. Every time he reduced your payments, his discretionary expenses went up by a similar amount. But the most satisfying development came Thursday afternoon, when James called to tell me about Daniel's response to our legal demands. Helen, Daniel's attorney, contacted me this morning. They want to negotiate a settlement. What kind of settlement? Daniel is willing to buy out your partnership stake, but he's claiming the company is only worth $6 million, not $8.9 million. He's offering to pay you $2.1 million. That's not acceptable. I want the full amount based on current market valuation. Helen, his attorney also mentioned that Daniel is reconsidering one of the acquisition offers. Apparently, there's a California company that's been pursuing StreamLine for several months. How much is their offer? $12.3 million. I was quiet for a moment, doing math in my head. If StreamLine sold for $12.3 million, my 35% stake would be worth more than $4 million. James, I want Daniel to know that I'm aware of the higher acquisition offers. If he's serious about settling this matter, he needs to base my buyout on the actual market value of the company, not some artificially reduced number his attorney invented. Helen, there's something else. The district attorney's office has assigned an investigator to review your elder abuse complaint. They want to interview you next week. Good. I want them to see every piece of evidence we've compiled. Helen, I need you to understand what this means. If the DA's office finds evidence of criminal wrongdoing, Daniel could face charges, even if he pays you the money he owes. James, Daniel made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences. Friday morning, I received a call that I wasn't expecting from one of Daniel's employees, a young woman named Sarah, who worked in StreamLine's accounting department. Mrs. Westbrook, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. I got your number from your attorney's office. How can I help you, Sarah? Mrs. Westbrook, I've been working for StreamLine for 3 years, and I want you to know that a lot of us employees have been uncomfortable with some of the financial decisions Mr. Westbrook has been making. What kind of decisions? Well, he's been using company credit cards for personal expenses, charging his mortgage payments to the business as executive housing allowances, and paying for his girlfriend's car lease through our marketing budget. I was taking notes as fast as I could write. Sarah, why are you telling me this? Because some of us did research after your press conference, and we found out that you're the investor who made this company possible. Mr. Westbrook always talks about building StreamLine from nothing, but he never mentions that his mother provided the startup capital. That doesn't seem right. Sarah, would you be willing to provide this information to my attorney and the district attorney's investigators? Yes, ma'am. Several of us would. We believe in what this company could be, but we don't believe in stealing from investors to fund personal lifestyles. After I hung up with Sarah, I called James immediately. James, we just got our smoking gun. Daniel has been using company funds for personal expenses, and his own employees are willing to testify about it. Helen, if that's true, then this isn't just civil fraud. It's criminal embezzlement. James, I want you to contact the district attorney's office immediately. Daniel isn't just a son who disappointed his mother. He's a business owner who's been stealing from his company and his investors. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt like the final step in my transformation from naive mother to empowered businesswoman. I called Daniel's office directly and asked to speak with him. Mom, thank God you called. I've been trying to figure out how to fix this situation. Daniel, there's only one way to fix this situation. Sell the company and pay me what you owe me. But Mom, if I sell StreamLine, I'll lose everything I've worked for. Daniel, you lost everything you worked for the moment you decided to steal from me. Now you're just facing the consequences. What if I agree to the full buyout amount? What if I find a way to pay you the $3.1 million without selling the company? Daniel, it's too late for half measures. Your employees have contacted me about your use of company funds for personal expenses. The district attorney's office is reviewing evidence of criminal embezzlement. This isn't just about our partnership anymore. This is about your pattern of financial fraud. My employees called you? Several of them. Apparently, your staff has been uncomfortable with your financial practices for quite some time. Mom, I can fix this. I can change how I handle company expenses. I can be more transparent about financial decisions. Daniel, the time for changes was 5 years ago, when you first started reducing my payments to fund your lifestyle. Now it's time for consequences. What do you want from me? I want you to accept the $12.3 million acquisition offer and close the sale within 30 days. I want my full share of the proceeds, $4.3 million. And I want you to publicly acknowledge that your success was built on my investment and that you violated the trust I placed in you. $4.3 million? Mom, that's more than your 35% share. The extra money is compensation for 5 years of reduced payments, legal fees, and punitive damages for financial elder abuse. Daniel, you're going to pay me every penny you cost me plus interest. And if I refuse, then the company will be sold at auction to satisfy my legal claims. The district attorney will pursue criminal charges for embezzlement, and your reputation in the business community will be destroyed. Your choice. I hung up the phone and looked out at the mountains beyond Scottsdale, feeling more powerful and in control than I had felt in years. For 66 years, I had been the person who accommodated other people's needs, who avoided conflict, who trusted family members to do right by me even when evidence suggested otherwise. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone who understood that respect isn't given. It's demanded and enforced. And tomorrow Daniel was going to learn the difference. The following Monday morning marked exactly 2 weeks since Daniel had canceled my flight home and told me I was smothering him. As I sat in my hotel room, reviewing the stack of legal documents and financial reports that had accumulated over the past 14 days, I realized that this period had been the most empowering 2 weeks of my entire adult life. At 10 a.m., my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting. Mom, it's over. I'm accepting the acquisition offer. Daniel's voice was flat, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. Which offer, Daniel? The $12.3 million from TechFlow Solutions in San Diego. They want to close within 30 days. And my share? $4.3 million, as you demanded. Your attorney will receive the paperwork this afternoon. I should have felt victorious in that moment, but instead I felt something more complex. Relief mixed with sadness for what our relationship had become, and pride in what I had discovered about my own strength. Daniel, I need you to understand something. This was never about the money. What do you mean? I mean that if you had been honest with me from the beginning, if you had treated me like a partner instead of a burden, we could have celebrated StreamLine's success together. The money was always yours to earn. I just wanted to be respected as the person who made it possible. Mom, I know I made mistakes. Daniel, you didn't make mistakes. You made deliberate choices to deceive and manipulate me. There's a difference. I never meant to hurt you, but you did hurt me, and more importantly, you taught me something about myself that I needed to learn. What's that? That I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that I don't have to accept being disrespected by anyone, not even my own son. The acquisition process moved quickly once Daniel committed to the sale. TechFlow Solutions had been pursuing StreamLine for 8 months, and they were eager to complete the transaction before other competitors could make higher offers. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched from my extended stay in Scottsdale as Daniel's company was systematically evaluated, appraised, and prepared for transfer to new ownership. The due diligence process confirmed what I had suspected. StreamLine was significantly more valuable than Daniel had ever admitted to me. TechFlow's analysis revealed that the company had been undervaluing its contracts, understating its growth potential, and maintaining artificially low profit projections to minimize tax obligations. The actual fair market value of StreamLine was closer to $15 million, which meant that even at $12.3 million, Daniel was selling for less than the company was worth. Mrs. Westbrook, your son could have negotiated a higher price if he'd been willing to wait. TechFlow's acquisition manager told me during one of our conversations, but he seemed very motivated to close quickly. Of course he was motivated to close quickly. The district attorney's investigation was progressing, and Daniel's legal team had advised him that completing the sale and paying off investors would demonstrate good faith cooperation with the authorities. But the most satisfying part of the acquisition process was watching Daniel have to explain to his new corporate bosses why his mother had filed elder abuse complaints against him and why his company was being sold under legal duress. It's unusual to see a family partnership dissolve so acrimoniously, TechFlow's CEO mentioned to me during the final closing meeting. Typically, family businesses work out their differences privately. Mr. Harrison, this stopped being a family matter when my son decided to treat me like a business obstacle instead of his mother and partner. Sometimes public accountability is the only way to ensure justice. The closing took place on a Wednesday morning in the conference room of James O'Connor's law firm. Daniel arrived looking haggard and defeated, accompanied by his attorney and Megan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the media coverage began. As we sat around that polished conference table, reviewing and signing the final paperwork, I thought about how different this moment was from the evening 5 years earlier when Daniel had asked me to invest in his dream. Then, we had been partners united by family love and shared ambition. Now, we were adversaries, separated by betrayal and legal obligations. The wire transfer of my $4.3 million was completed at 2:47 p.m. on Wednesday, September 18th. I know the exact time because I was watching my phone when the bank notification arrived, confirming that the largest financial transaction of my life had been successfully processed. But more important than the money was what happened after the closing meeting ended. As Daniel was gathering his papers and preparing to leave, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I know you probably hate me right now, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and realized that I didn't hate him. I felt disappointed, betrayed, and angry, but not hatred. "Daniel, I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and I don't respect the choices you've made. Those are two different things. Is there any way we can repair our relationship? It was the question I'd been dreading because I honestly didn't know the answer. Daniel, that depends entirely on what you do next. If you learn from this experience and become a better person, then maybe someday we can rebuild something. But if you continue to blame everyone else for the consequences of your choices, then no, we can't. What do you mean? I mean that you've spent the past 3 weeks trying to minimize your responsibility for what happened. You've called it a misunderstanding, blamed it on business pressures, and suggested that I overreacted to minor issues. Until you can honestly acknowledge that you deliberately deceived and manipulated me, we can't even begin to discuss forgiveness. Daniel was quiet for a long moment before responding. Mom, I did deceive you. I did manipulate the partnership agreement to benefit myself at your expense. I did reduce your payments so I could spend more money on personal luxuries. And I did plan to dilute your ownership without giving you proper notification or choice in the matter. It was the first completely honest thing he'd said to me in months. And I did cancel your flight home and tell you that you were smothering me because I was angry that you were asking questions I didn't want to answer. Why, Daniel? Why did you think that was acceptable? Because somewhere along the way, I started thinking of your investment as my money. Instead of our partnership, I started seeing you as an obligation instead of a partner. And I started believing that being successful gave me the right to make decisions about your financial future without consulting you. And now I realize that success without integrity is just expensive failure. As I drove my rental car back to the hotel that afternoon, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I had won. Completely and decisively. Daniel had been forced to acknowledge his wrongdoing, pay me significantly more than my original investment, and face public consequences for his financial manipulation. But I also felt sad about what we had lost in the process. The close relationship Daniel and I had shared for 38 years was probably irreparable. The trust that had been broken couldn't be rebuilt with apologies and wire transfers. That evening, I called my sister Margaret in Tucson to tell her what had happened. Helen, I can't believe Daniel did those things to you, but I also can't believe you fought back the way you did. What do you mean? I mean that most women our age would have just accepted being pushed around by their adult children. They would have been hurt and disappointed, but they wouldn't have hired attorneys and investigators and fought for their rights. Margaret, I spent 7 years after Robert died, letting other people make decisions about my life and my money. I trusted Daniel to handle my investment properly, and I trusted that family loyalty would protect me. But this situation taught me that trust has to be earned and maintained. It's not something you give once and never question again. So what are you going to do now? It was a good question, and one I'd been thinking about since the closing meeting ended. I'm going to go home to Tempe, and I'm going to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. For the first time since Robert died, I have real financial security and complete independence. I can do anything I want. Are you going to forgive Daniel? Eventually, maybe. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that what happened wasn't serious. It means accepting what happened and choosing not to let it define my future. The next morning, I checked out of the Marriott and drove my rental car to the Phoenix airport, where I booked a first-class flight home, paid for with my own money, on my own schedule, with no one's permission but my own. As the plane lifted off from Sky Harbor Airport, and I watched Scottsdale disappear below me, I realized that this trip had changed me in ways that went far beyond financial gain. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, learned to advocate for myself in ways I'd never done before, and proven that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. The district attorney's investigation continued for another 6 weeks, ultimately resulting in Daniel pleading guilty to misdemeanor charges of financial elder abuse. He received 2 years of probation, community service, and was required to attend counseling for family financial abuse. The criminal record would follow him for the rest of his career. Megan left Daniel 2 months after the sale closed, apparently deciding that a man with a criminal record and damaged reputation wasn't the successful entrepreneur she thought she was dating. The last I heard, she had moved back to Los Angeles and was working for another luxury resort chain. But those were their consequences to face. I had my own future to build. $4.3 million is more money than I had ever imagined having, but it's not infinite money. After paying James O'Connor's legal fees, Maria Santos's investigation costs, and the taxes on my settlement, I had approximately $3.7 million to invest for my future. My first decision was to hire a fee-only financial advisor who specialized in helping older women manage significant assets. Patricia Chen had been recommended by James, and she had 20 years of experience helping widows and retirees navigate the complexities of wealth management. Helen, the most important thing to understand is that this money can provide you with complete financial independence for the rest of your life if we invest it properly, Patricia explained during our first meeting. Based on your age and lifestyle, a conservative portfolio yielding 4% annually would give you about $150,000 in income each year. $150,000 a year. That was more money than Robert and I had ever made combined during our best years in the construction business. Patricia, I don't need that much money to live comfortably. What if I only took $75,000 a year and let the rest continue growing? Then you'd be leaving a substantial inheritance to your beneficiaries, and you'd have additional security against inflation and unexpected expenses. Beneficiaries. That was a complicated topic now that my relationship with Daniel was so damaged. Over the next several months, I worked with Patricia and James to create a comprehensive estate plan that reflected my new financial reality and my changed family circumstances. The will I established included provisions for Daniel, but with strict conditions designed to ensure that any inheritance would be used responsibly. But more importantly, I began using my newfound financial freedom to build the kind of life I had always wanted, but never thought was possible. My first major purchase was a new house. Not a mansion like Daniel's, but a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a community designed for active adults. The house had a swimming pool, a workshop where I could pursue woodworking projects, and a guest room for friends who might visit. The second major change was travel. For the first time in my life, I had the resources to see places I'd only read about. I spent 2 weeks in Ireland, tracing my family's genealogy and walking through villages where my great-grandparents had lived. I took a cruise through the Mediterranean, visiting museums and historical sites I had seen in books but never imagined I'd experience personally. But the most meaningful change was the volunteer work I began with organizations that helped other older women who had been victims of financial abuse. Working with the Area Agency on Aging, I started speaking to groups about the warning signs of family financial manipulation and the legal resources available to victims. My story isn't unique, I would tell audiences of women my age. Adult children who take advantage of their parents' trust and generosity are more common than most people realize. The difference is that most victims don't fight back. They accept being diminished and controlled because they're afraid of damaging family relationships. These speaking engagements led to media interviews, and eventually I was featured in several magazine articles about elder financial abuse prevention. The Arizona Republic ran a 3-part series about my experience with Daniel, which prompted dozens of other women to contact me with similar stories. One of those women was Ruth Martinez, a 72-year-old widow whose son had convinced her to invest her late husband's life insurance money in his restaurant business, then had systematically drained the account to fund his gambling addiction. Helen, I kept making excuses for him because he was my son, Ruth told me during one of our coffee meetings. Even when I couldn't pay my rent and had to ask my daughter for money, I told myself that Michael was just going through a difficult period. Ruth, what changed your mind? Reading about your story. You showed me that being a good mother doesn't mean accepting financial abuse. It means holding your children accountable for their choices. Ruth hired James O'Connor to help her recover what remained of her investment, and she eventually got back 60% of the money her son had stolen. More importantly, she learned to set boundaries with adult children who saw her as an ATM rather than a person deserving of respect. Stories like Ruth's reinforced my conviction that fighting back against Daniel had been the right decision, not just for me personally, but as an example for other women facing similar situations. But the most unexpected development in my new life came 18 months after the StreamLine sale, when I received a phone call from an attorney in San Diego. Mrs. Westbrook, my name is David Kim, and I represent TechFlow Solutions, the company that acquired your son's business. I'm calling because we've discovered some information that might interest you. What kind of information? Well, as part of our integration process, we've been analyzing StreamLine's historical performance and growth potential. Based on our analysis, we believe the company was significantly undervalued at the time of the acquisition. Undervalued how? Our conservative estimate is that StreamLine was worth at least $18 million when we purchased it for $12.3 million. The software platform your son developed is more valuable than anyone realized, and the customer contracts have been more profitable than projected. Why are you telling me this? Because we're interested in developing similar software platforms, and we'd like to discuss the possibility of you investing in our expansion plans. You clearly have good instincts about technology investments, and we could use a partner who understands both the opportunities and the risks. An investment opportunity with a Fortune 500 company that valued my business judgment and wanted me as a partner, not a silent financial backer. Mr. Kim, I'm interested in hearing more about your proposal. 3 months later, I invested $2 million in TechFlow's new software development division, with a partnership agreement that gave me board representation, quarterly financial reports, and guaranteed input on all major business decisions. The irony was perfect. I was now a major investor in the company that had bought StreamLine, which meant I was indirectly profiting from the success that Daniel had built, but no longer controlled. But more importantly, I was being treated as a respected business partner by executives who valued my opinions and kept me informed about every aspect of our ventures. 6 months after joining TechFlow's investment partnership, I received an unexpected phone call from Daniel. Mom, I wanted you to know that I've been going to counseling like the court ordered, and I've learned a lot about myself and the choices I made. It was the first time we'd spoken since the closing meeting 2 years earlier. What have you learned, Daniel? I learned that I developed an addiction to spending and lifestyle inflation that made me rationalize stealing from you. I learned that I was so focused on impressing other people that I lost sight of the values you and Dad taught me. And I learned that success without integrity is just a house of cards waiting to collapse. How are you doing now? I'm working for TechFlow as a senior software developer. It's not my company anymore, but I'm good at what I do, and they're paying me well. Megan and I broke up after the sale, and I've moved into a modest apartment in Phoenix. I'm living within my means for the first time in years. Are you happy? I'm more at peace than I've been in a long time. I don't have the stress of running a company. I don't have the pressure of maintaining an expensive lifestyle. And I don't have the guilt of knowing I was hurting people to fund my ego. Daniel, why are you calling me now? Because I want to try to rebuild our relationship, if you're willing. Not the way it was before, because that relationship was built on my deception and your trust. But maybe we can build something new, based on honesty and mutual respect. I thought about his request for several minutes before responding. Daniel, I'm willing to try, but it has to be on different terms than before. I'm not going to be the accommodating mother who accepts whatever you tell me without question. I'm not going to be the financial safety net for poor decisions. And I'm not going to pretend that what happened wasn't serious just to preserve family harmony. I understand, and I accept those terms. And Daniel, if you ever lie to me again about anything, finances, relationships, work, whatever, our relationship will be permanently over. I've learned that I don't need anyone in my life who doesn't treat me with honesty and respect. I understand that too. We started slowly. Phone calls every few weeks, occasional coffee meetings when I was in Phoenix, and updates about our respective lives and work. It wasn't the close relationship we'd once shared, but it was honest and respectful in ways our previous relationship had never been. Daniel kept his word about financial honesty. When he wanted to buy a house the following year, he showed me his budget, his savings account, and his mortgage pre-approval letter before making an offer. When he started dating someone new, he introduced me to her early in the relationship instead of keeping me at arm's length. Most importantly, he never again asked me for money or investment advice, and I never offered. We had learned to separate our personal relationship from any financial entanglements. But the real measure of our progress came 2.5 years after the StreamLine sale, when Daniel called to tell me he was getting engaged. Mom, I want you to meet Jennifer before I propose to her. I want your honest opinion about whether she's someone who will be good for me and respectful of our family. Daniel, you don't need my permission to get married. I know I don't need permission, but I want your blessing. And more importantly, I want to make sure I'm not repeating the same mistakes I made with Megan. Jennifer Martinez was a high school teacher from Tempe who drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment she shared with 2 rescue cats. She was intelligent, kind, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status symbols. Mrs. Westbrook, Daniel told me about what happened with his business and your lawsuit, she said during our first meeting. I want you to know that I think you did the right thing. Family members shouldn't get away with treating each other badly, just because they're related. I liked her immediately. Daniel and Jennifer were married in a simple ceremony at a community center in Phoenix, with a reception that cost less than one of his dinners with Megan used to cost. I gave a toast at the reception about second chances and the importance of building relationships on honesty rather than impressions. My son learned some hard lessons about integrity and respect, I told the wedding guests. But he learned them, and that's what matters. It's never too late to become the person you're supposed to be. As I watched Daniel dance with his new wife, I realized that our family crisis had ultimately made both of us stronger and more authentic people. Daniel had learned that success without character is hollow, and I had learned that respect must be demanded, not hoped for. But most importantly, I had discovered that at 69 years old, I was just getting started on the most empowering chapter of my life. Now, 3 years after that trip to Scottsdale that changed everything, I want to share what I've learned with every woman who might be facing a similar situation. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong about your financial situation, when the explanations don't make sense, when family members become evasive about money matters, those feelings are usually right. Don't dismiss your concerns just because the person involved is someone you love. Second, documentation is everything. Keep records of all financial transactions, save emails and text messages, and don't rely on verbal promises about money. If someone claims they can't provide written financial statements or contracts, that's a red flag that should make you more suspicious, not less. Third, family relationships don't exempt anyone from basic standards of honesty and respect. Love doesn't mean accepting being diminished, controlled, or taken advantage of. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for an adult child is to hold them accountable for their choices and let them face the consequences of their actions. Fourth, it's never too late to advocate for yourself. I was 66 years old when I decided to fight back against Daniel's manipulation and many people told me I should just accept the situation to preserve family harmony. But standing up for yourself isn't about age. It's about self-respect and dignity. Fifth, financial independence is about more than money. It's about having choices and control over your own life. The $4.3 million I eventually received was important, but the confidence and strength I discovered in myself were even more valuable. And finally, success stories aren't always about getting everything you want. Sometimes they're about refusing to accept less than you deserve. My relationship with Daniel today is different from what it was before our crisis, but in many ways, it's healthier. We're honest with each other now in ways we never were before. He respects my intelligence and independence in ways he never did when he thought of me as just his supportive mother. And I love him in a way that's based on who he actually is, not who I hoped he would be. The investment I made in TechFlow Solutions has grown to be worth over $3 million, and I remain an active partner in their expansion plans. I serve on 2 nonprofit boards focused on elder rights and financial abuse prevention. I've traveled to 18 countries and learned to scuba dive at the age of 68. Most importantly, I've learned that being a grandmother doesn't mean being passive, accommodating, or grateful for whatever treatment your adult children decide to give you. It means being a wise, experienced woman who has earned the right to be treated with dignity and respect. If you're watching this video and recognizing your own situation in my story, I want you to know that you have more power than you think you do. You have legal rights, financial resources, and probably more strength than you've ever had to use before. Don't accept being managed, manipulated, or marginalized by anyone, not even your own children. Don't let fear of conflict prevent you from demanding honesty and accountability. And don't ever believe that family loyalty requires you to silently endure being treated poorly. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to discover that you're stronger and more capable than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. My name is Helen Westbrook, and if a 66-year-old widow from Tempe, Arizona, can take on a manipulative son, hire investigators, face down lawyers, and emerge stronger and wealthier than before, then honey, so can you. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too naive, or too dependent to fight for what's rightfully yours. Because you're not. You're just getting started. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, if that hype button appears, please click it to help other women see this message. We're stronger when we support each other. And your grandmother's stories matter just as much as mine do. God bless. And remember, it's never too late to become the woman you were always meant to be.